Dewey, it's so good to see you. It's really good to have you and sit down and have this chat about your new book, Finding Joy on Death Row.
Well, thank you for having me with you. It's a complete opportunity of joy for me. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. So, Dewey, where are you from?
I'm from Denver, Colorado. That's where I grew up, and I graduated from high school there. So Denver's home for me.
So, tell me about your childhood in Denver.
Well, I grew up in a home where my dad was a pastor of a church, so I'm a preacher's kid. And so most preacher's kids are engaged in church life, just not on Sunday. It's several days during the week. So we had Sunday where we were in church, and we had also Bible studies, we had prayer meetings, we had choir rehearsals and ministry groups that were meeting. So usually 3 or 4 times a week I was at church. So it was all about church as a preacher's kid when I was growing up.
So, I'm curious. So, you said you were in church all the time. How did that shape you to who you are now?
Well, it was very formative because I became profoundly interested in what the Bible was all about. And I started preaching when I was 16 years old. And so I would read the Bible, read commentaries, read dictionaries, Bible dictionaries. My dad had a series of little pamphlets with sermons, and when I would ride the bus to school, I would read one going to school, and then I had an afternoon job. I'd read one going to work, and then I'd read a sermon coming home on the bus. So I was all into preaching when I was a teenager.
So, you live now in Durham, North Carolina. So, how'd you end up here?
Well, I ended up pastoring in Denver, and while I was doing that, my oldest daughter passed away. She got sick, and for 7 years we worked to try to get her well, and then she passed away. My youngest daughter lived in Durham, had recently been married, and my wife immediately started saying, I want to be near our daughter in Durham. I resisted because I was pastoring a church and I was engaged in so many campaigns and activities in Denver, and I had kind of gained a reputation in Denver doing things, and my wife is saying, I don't want to live here anymore. But I gave in and I surrendered, and I followed the lead of God and made the move to Durham, not knowing how it was going to work out, but we moved here to be near our daughter and new husband at that time.
So, you moved here to Denver, moved here from Denver to Durham. What did you do when you got here?
Well, I got hired with with Durham Social Services. I have a background in child welfare. My bachelor's degree was in child welfare. So I was able to get hired on doing child protection work. And also we joined a church, and the church had a prison ministry, and I just started joining in that. It gave me an opportunity to preach. Going to prison, I got a chance to preach, which I was missing because I went from preaching every Sunday to I didn't have any place to preach, but they had a place for me. So once or twice a month I'd preach. And the pastor was a professor at Yale Divinity School. And the next thing I know, I'm applying to go to Divinity School. So I go to Divinity School, and I'm preaching at the prison when I moved to Durham.
Now, what prison was that?
It was the Guest Road Prison.
Okay.
And I started there in 2008, and they closed it in 2011, the same year I graduated from Duke.
So your book is Finding Joy on Death Row, and that's not a death row prison. So how did you end up in the other prison that's not a death row prison?
Yeah, when Guest Road Prison closed, when the state closed it, one of the members of the church that I belonged to said he was doing another ministry through a program, an international prison ministry program called Kairos. And he said, you ought to come and do Kairos. And it was an intensive program, 4 days intense with men in Central Prison in Raleigh. And so I went to do that ministry there. And after I did that, there was a group that did the Kairos ministry that came to me and said, we're getting ready to go to do this same thing, something very similar on death row, and they invited me to come and be a part of that. And so I started going to death row because a special group wanted to do an intensive program with the men on death row.
Now we've all seen death row movies, so you said death row, I am blown away. So, so what was it like walking into a death row prison?
Well, it was a little bit of a shock because the images that I had of death row came from movies. And, it was always drab, drear, dark colors, very ugly involvement with those that are incarcerated. The correctional officers are always very stern and ugly toward those that are on death row. And I go in, and it was clean. The walls were freshly painted. The floors were freshly painted. The railing was freshly painted. Everything was so much different from what I expected. And so the group of us that went in to do the ministry, we were inside this room, and there was a plexiglass on the outside, and we saw the men coming in. And we were there like, what's this going to be like? We were kind of worried about what are we getting into? What am I getting myself into?
So let me get this straight. You just said they were in the plexiglass separating you guys?
Well, yes. From the room we were in, it's a big room, a room that could house probably, at one time I did an event and there was like 75 people. So it's a big room, but before you come into the room, there's this plexiglass in the hallway, and we could see the men that are on death row come into the room. So from inside the room, we looked out, and we could see them. We were cautious and suspicious and not knowing what we're getting into, but they came in with some pep in their step and energy and power, and they were excited because they were getting ready to do something that they normally didn't get to do. And so instead of us being the ones trying to get them pepped up, they came in and giving us fist bumps and how you doing and glad you all are here. So it was kind of a reversal. That very first time I went to death row was kind of a reversal for me because I was expecting what I saw in the Green Mile movie or Dead Man Walking movie. I expected it to just be very bitter, but I didn't get that from the men.
The men come in, and they come sit down. What are you guys doing? Were you one-to-one ministry? Were you preaching to them? Was it, a group setting? What was it like?
Well, what happened in this environment was the men on death row were divided into different table groups. So there would be 6 men from death row and 3 men that were volunteers coming in to do ministry, sitting at a table. And then there were 4 tables in the room. So each of us had a group that we ministered to. We would have a talk. One of us that was volunteering to do the ministry would do a talk on a subject. And that time, my subject was forgiveness. And then after the volunteer did a talk, each table would discuss what the talk was about, what you thought about the talk. Did it mean anything to you? Did it relate to your life? And then we would have the men, we'd have these big pieces of paper, and we'd have them to draw a picture depicting what they thought about the topic. For instance, say it was forgiveness, and I did my talk, and then they would each table had a different picture. And then we would, after that, we would show the pictures to one another. The men would get up and talk about what they drew and why they drew their picture. And so it was engaging, and they got a chance. That's something they don't get to do. They don't get to express themselves. And at this table, they got a chance to talk, and their opinion counted just as much as anybody else's, and they were valued. And their drawings, an opportunity to do a drawing together with 6 men, and then to get up and talk about their drawing and talk about forgiveness or whatever the subject was. It was, I think it was a real blessing for them to do that.
I can only imagine. I can't imagine. So you're preaching, you're working on in this groups with the men, and you guys are presenting, and you're exchanging ideas and thoughts. And so how did you get to the book? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, first, let me tell you about my first day on death row.
Okay.
We were doing these talks. The men were sitting around talking about them, and they were drawing their pictures and discussing them. And then we would have a break. And so we had cookies and punch. And I sat down at the table with some cookies and punch. And one of the men on death row came up to me and sat down and leaned in toward me and said, "I need to tell you something." I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm not on death row. I'm on life row. And I'm going to live my life the best I can every day." That man changed my life because I was down in the dumps at the time that he told that to me. And here's somebody on death row speaking life into me, who was able to leave the prison when this program was over. I was able to leave and go home. He had to go back to his cell, but he was speaking life into me. He wanted me to know that something had happened in his life that made such a big difference that he had to let me know. And
Hold up. I got to ask this question.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. So you said you were in another place in your life. So help me understand that.
Well, I wasn't pastoring, and I wanted to pastor. I knew that God had gifted me to preach and to teach and to lead a congregation, but it just wasn't happening. And it not happening led to a funk in my life, into my ministry, into what I was doing. I wasn't going in the direction that I wanted to go and that I saw myself going. So I was down because I wasn't where I wanted to be. This man was not where he wanted to be, but he was up about life. And so he taught me a lesson that regardless of where you are, there is power in God, in allowing God to work in you, that God could find you, that you could find God, and God could find a way to use you regardless of wherever you are. And so that ministered to me so much. And and talk about the book, how did I get to the book? He is a featured part of the book. I feature him near the beginning of my time on death row. And then at the end, when I have this reunion with the men, I feature him. And I got to go meet his mother and talk with his mother. And so that man changed my life and made a big difference.
So help me understand the guys that are in debt, because a lot of the people there, they've been there for a number of years. So give me some insight into that.
Well, to be on death row, you have to be convicted of killing somebody plus some other heinous activity.
Okay.
So it's murder plus rape, murder plus kidnapping, murder plus some abduction, or murder plus you had a firearm that was used, or a robbery was done. And so usually it's not because of passion. It's not a murder because of passion. One of these other heinous activities have to be added in for you to get the death penalty. And so it's really problematic because a lot of that depends upon the county you live in. The county I live in has 0 people on death row. The county next door to me has 10. So what happens at the county line? That we have 0 from my county and 10 from the next county over. And it has to do with who the prosecutors are, what the judges are, the courts, and the system. So it's very problematic as to who ends up going to death row or not. And so that's a big part of the whole thing of needing to resolve how we handle dealing with death row, because there's an inequity in the system.
So we'll get back to that in a minute. So let's go back to the book.
Okay.
So tell me about the book. Tell me about the why behind the book. Help me a little more, get more a little insight into that.
Okay, so I'm missing joy in my life because I'm not where I want to be in ministry.
Okay.
So I dedicate a year to joy. Everything I'm going to do this year is going to be about joy because I've got to get joy. And I'm preaching about joy, and God sends me to death row to preach. And so I at the beginning of the year, I say, joy, everything I do is going to be joy. And in October of that year, the door opens for me to go to death row. And so I start preaching on death row on Sundays, and I'm researching joy. I'm buying books about joy. I bought like 20 books on joy that year. And I'm reading everything about joy, and I'm online researching joy, and I found out that Yale Divinity School was having this competition, and they invited preachers to send in sermons about joy. I said, well, I'm preaching about joy. I'll send my sermons into Yale. I said, death row may not be what they want to hear about, but that's what I'm preaching about. And lo and behold, my sermons won top honors at Yale.
So Dewey, who'd you write the book for?
Well, initially I wrote this book for the men that are incarcerated. I made a commitment to them that I would take their stories and I would get their stories out some kind of way. And so they became engaged in the whole process of telling their stories because they've been locked away. They've been made less than human. They've been made a number in the system. And this was a chance for their stories to get outside. And I made that commitment to them. But after I was putting the book together, I realized this book was for more than them. This book is for every person that feels incarcerated in some kind of way. You may be out on the streets walking around, but you feel you're locked up. You're not where you want to be. You're not doing what you want to do. And these stories are for those persons also. People that are locked in debt, or locked in health problems, or locked in mental health struggles, people that are locked in marriage even, or locked in parenting, and you just feel there's no way out of what you're doing, locked in a job that's a dead-end job, no way for you to go higher or to get any place. Just like the men on death row are locked up, a person on the outside can feel locked up. And this is a book for every person. And we all feel that way from time to time. I don't care how much money you got or education you got, there's some time you feel like, I'm stuck. And this is a book for everybody. And so I wanted everybody that's willing to read it to come away with the message, there is hope if I will pursue the joy in my life, regardless of where I am. One thing I want to get across is that joy is more powerful than the bars that hold the men in prison. That some of the most restraining that takes place in life happens in prison. Prisons are designed to keep you in, to keep you locked up and locked down and pinned down. But joy is stronger than all the fences, all the bars, all the gates, all the correctional officers, all the rules and regulations. Joy is stronger than all of that because joy got into them when they were in this place where they're supposed to be tied down or shackled. And that is such a message for a person walking around. Joy is stronger than whatever you're going through. Whatever problem has you pinned down, joy is stronger than that. And so that's something that everybody needs to hear. Joy is a miracle ready to happen in your life as long as you will look for it and pursue it.
So you have this common theme of joy. And joy is, I was blown away when I read your book. I just was, the first time you even came and showed me the book, and I saw joy, and I was like, that is an interesting title, Finding Joy on Death Row. So why that title?
Well, first of all, because that's what I was preaching about. I intentionally decided that year was going to be about joy, and I'm preaching about joy. I win an award for preaching about joy. I have the men write about joy, and so joy became the topic. I committed to joy at the beginning of the year, and joy just kept running in the lane in front of me. And so it was very natural to make it about joy because that was my focus. I decided to go for it, to go for joy, and I cannot explain how much joy God has sent my way because I decided to go for it.
Tell me about the readers of your book.
Well, that's hard for me to gauge because I don't know who all has bought the book and I don't know their backgrounds. I do know that I've done a lot of presentations at churches and with ministries. So I think there's a fair portion of people that are in ministry, church-related groups, people doing prison ministries. I think it's safe to say that. But I think there's an element out there. Some of the reviews that I've gotten don't seem to be about prison ministry, just people that are interested in how they can make their life better and how life can be more of a blessing. So I think there's a mixture of people that are committed to ministry, but also just people in the world that want some joy in their life.
So I can only imagine how complex telling a story about people on death row. Tell me about the complexity of that.
Well, I've tried to keep it simple. I am God's preacher, and I'm going to preach to those that are in front of me. I've always tried to make sure that I did not look down on anybody that's behind bars. Typically, I don't even ask questions about what people have done. In the book, I did some research because the men were writing and I wanted their stories and their background highlighted. But I go to prison and I treat them as if I am going to the most prestigious congregation in the world. That the president and the governor are there, that senators and council people are there, that dignitaries and bankers and finance. I go with that type of attitude. And the men value that. They can feel it because I give them the very best I have. I preach like I'm preaching to royalty. And that's what I'm doing. These are children of the Most High, and I'm going to preach to them. And so I try to take away all this look down on somebody or see what they've done. They're there because they've done this crime. Some of them haven't done the crime. Some of them said they're innocent. And the innocence projects that are out there, almost every year somebody's getting off that should not have been incarcerated, should not have been on death row. And so I don't go with this notion that I'm going to the lowly to preach. I go with the notion that I am preaching to children of God. And that makes it simple. That takes away all of this negative ideas about people, because when you have that negative in your head about who you're preaching to, it's going to come through your words. And you are going to say some things in a cursing way, in a damning way to them. And God has set me there to elevate, to lift, and to bring life and joy and light. And so that's what I go with.
So, prison reform, very hotbed issue.
Yes.
How do you think your book impacts that?
Well, I am completely in favor of prison reform. I think we have had this system of retributive justice, and that's a system where punishment is set up to get even. One person does wrong, and then the system and society is going to punish them in a way to get even. And that's revenge. And that's not scriptural, that's not biblical, that's not godly. Even those that read the Bible have read that God said, vengeance is mine. It's not ours. God's going to take care of the vengeance. So we need some alternatives to revenge. There is a new theme of restorative justice that's been out for 20, 30, 40 years. It's been more and more prominent, and more courts are engaging in restorative justice, and I'm a big proponent of restorative justice. And that's where people come together and come up with alternatives to retribution. If I steal $100 from you, is my going to jail going to help you? What needs to happen is I need to have some reform in my life where I get your $100 back to that. I'm responsible to restoring you to what I took. And so restorative justice is working on how do we restore what has been taken. I've come up with a new phrase that I'm trying to push toward called liberation justice. And liberation justice is where people, individuals, perpetrators, victims, and the society are liberated behind what takes place. And so systems are set free, individuals are set free, victims are set free, perpetrators are set free. And so that's where I'm moving toward prison ministry reform, where liberation justice is a big part, where the heart is set free. And when people's hearts are set free, they're free indeed, and there's true reform. So there's the ministry reform, but there's also the prison reform. We have to move away from retribution. It statistically does not work. We'll build more and more prisons, spend more and more money trying to get even, to the point that we'll all go broke trying to do retribution. And so I'm in favor of moving away from that.
So your writing style. How would you describe your writing style?
Well, my writing style is about telling stories. I love to tell stories, and I try to tell my story, and then I've gotten the men to tell their stories. And so storytelling is a big part of my style. I also like to have truth. And I'm not into so much fantasy writing. I like true stories and how truth makes a difference in life. So that's a theme that's in my book. Finding Joy on Death Row is stories, but it's genuine, real stories of individuals. My story and those that are on death row, their stories.
For readers who are moved by your book and want to take action, what do you recommend?
Well, let me suggest for somebody that's interested in having a change in their life, I recommend that you do what I did. Pursue joy. If you really want some joy and you're missing it, you feel you're bound and tied down, start pursuing it. I dedicated a year to it, and joy has just been overwhelming. I've had year after year after year of joy just moving me here and moving me here, and joy has done so much simply because I pursued it. I made a decision to pursue it. So if somebody really is moved by this and you're trying to see what's my next step in my life, this is what you can do. Pursue it, and I believe in your pursuing it, you'll find joy. Look for it, and it will find you. But also, if somebody is interested in reform about prison ministry or about death row, I would invite those persons to get involved with groups. The Innocence Project is a big national movement. People can get involved with that. The National Coalition Against the Death Penalty is a move where people are getting together and trying to advocate that government will stop trying to kill people, or not just trying, there's some that are killing people. Some states are killing people, trying to get governments at the state level to stop doing that. So in your local community, your local state, you can go look up the National Coalition Against the Death Penalty, and you can get involved with the efforts there to stop killing people in your name. And so I invite people, those two places, the Innocence Project and the National Coalition Against the Death Penalty, are two places people could go.